Okay, let's dive in. Imagine Seoul today. Super modern, bustling, all these skyscrapers.
Mhm.
But think about what's underneath all that. Layers and layers of time. Almost like an archaeological site hidden right there. You walk around, see the usual stuff, but you're actually walking over these forgotten histories, these hidden paths. So today, we're kind of going on an expedition, a bit like Indiana Jones maybe, hunting for this hidden urban treasure, following a track that's been hiding in plain sight for, well, ages.
That's a great way to put it. And our focus for this deep dive is really specific. It's this train line, the Gyeongseong-Gate, that's Ushu in Hanja. It used to connect Dongdaemun, which everyone knows, right? Big historical and modern spot, to the area we now call Seongsu-dong. Back then, though, it was called Tupseum. Now, the thing is, even for many Koreans who know Seoul really well, this train line, it's just not something they know about. It feels like a real local secret. Maybe, older folks might remember it vaguely. But what our sources tell us is that its actual origin is, well, it's literally half a world away, which just adds this whole other dimension to the story.
Right. And that's where the adventure really kicks off. We've got these sources, articles, research notes, mentions of old maps, and they're basically our treasure map for this urban hunt. So our mission here in this deep dive is to unpack the really surprising, almost kind of unbelievable story of this little iron horse, this asa, as they called it, and figure out why this particular train line, which is pretty much unknown today, is such a fascinating window into Seoul's past, how it grew, and how parts of the city you wouldn't think are connected actually are, all thanks to this forgotten track. Less history lesson, more urban exploration.
Exactly. And every good treasure hunt needs a starting point, right?
Mhm.
X marks the spot. So, according to our sources, if you want to find where this whole thing began, you need to go to Dongdaemun Station, specifically near Exit 6, right around where there's a Latioria now. Apparently, there's a small marker there. Easy to miss, probably. But it quietly notes that this was the start of the Gyeongseong-Gate company's line, way back in the 1930s. It's literally the ghost of a starting line, right there in the modern city.
Okay, so picture that. You're standing there, maybe grabbing a burger, totally clueless about the history, literally under your feet. But here's where it gets really, really interesting. And honestly, kind of mind-blowing. Based on these sources, you'd think logically a train line running in colonial Gyeongseong, later Seoul, would have started here, yeah. Made here, maybe? But nope. These sources just shatter that idea. They say this little train, this iron horse, it didn't start its life in Korea at all. Its actual beginning, San Francisco, USA.
It's wild, isn't it? It's one of those details that just stops you. The sources give this incredible picture, almost surreal. They describe it like a tram, one that had just been catching the free winds of San Francisco, was somehow just picked up and plonked down right into the middle of 1930s Gyeongseong. A totally different world. Just imagine that for a second. A piece of American city transit built for, California sunshine and hills, suddenly trying to navigate the streets and the expanding edges of colonial Korea.
That image is powerful.
Yeah.
Okay, so this train with this totally unexpected transatlantic past, what did it actually do here from the 30s up to the early 60s?
Well, our sources are pretty clear that even though it was small, its role was really vital, foundational even, but easy to miss now. It wasn't just about getting around inside the city limits as they were then, it actively pushed those boundaries outwards. One source calls it a major artery. It was absolutely crucial for moving stuff, goods and people. Think about it connecting the established eastern bits of Gyeongseong-Seoul with what was then northeastern Gyeonggi province, areas that were developing but weren't really integrated yet. It linked up new factories, workplaces, neighborhoods. And the sources also make a point of saying this line was run by the Gyeongseong-Gate Co. Ltd. that was totally separate from the main city trams run by the Gyeongseong Electric Company. So its own unique little system with this very, very strange origin story.
A separate, vital network with roots in San Francisco. Okay, that's the treasure's origin. But the real hunt is tracing its path today, right? How do the sources say we can actually follow this ghost train through modern Seoul?
Yeah, this is where the sources get really practical, almost like giving you instructions for a modern-day scavenger hunt. They explain you can find the path by looking for these really narrow alleyways. But not just any alleys. On a cadastral map that's a Aegon, these specific alleys are still marked as railroad use. These are basically the little slivers of land that were set aside for the train way back when. And that designation, that footprint, it's still there on the official maps, even though the train's long gone and everything's built up around it. It's like the ground itself remembers the track.
The ground remembers. I like that. So what's it like actually walking this remembered path today? What do the sources say about that experience?
They describe it as this really unique way to feel the city's history, like literally layered. When you walk these narrow strips, assuming you can find them, you're right there in 2021 Seoul. You know, the noise, the cafes, whatever. But you're also walking on land shaped by the big development boom in the 60s and 70s, and you're walking the exact path of the colonial era Gyeongseong-Gate train from the 1930s. There's a quote in the sources from Professor Kim Sae-ryuk talking about seeing three cultures, these different time periods, all stacked up together in the city's fabric. And honestly, when you add in that San Francisco origin, you could totally argue, like the sources kind of hint, that you're bumping into a potential fourth culture, just subtly there in the experience of walking that path.
It really is like peeling back layers of time with every step you take. So what kind of clues, like specific things on the street, do the sources point to? How do you know you're on the right track, literally?
They mention several key things to look out for. Alleys that split really sharply. The source uses this great Korean phrase, "우유주 kalnalkyorum," meaning like a knife blade. This super sharp division in the street plan often shows where the train's straight path cut through whatever was there before or whatever came later. Near the Dongdaemun start, some areas still have echoes of the past mentions of Dalbang, those tiny rented rooms and hazukjib boarding houses, maybe places that lined the route back then. Now the path isn't perfect today. It gets cut off quite a bit by big modern projects, like those huge apartment complexes near Cheong and Gyecheon, the Ilok-Luso area, built right over parts of the old line. But then, and this is so typical of Seoul, the sources say the path just pops up again further down the line. It shows what they call Seoul's amazing repermeating dynamism. The old kind of pushes its way back through the new.
So the city builds over it, but that underlying map designation, that old railroad use thing, means it can reappear. Wow. Any other, like, physical markers mentioned?
Oh yeah, definitely. The sources trace the general direction. After Dongdaemun, it crossed Cheong-Gyecheon Stream, went towards Majendong, historically linked to the meat market. Then it turned towards Wangsimni and the Sangdonggyo Bridge area. From there, it split one way towards Gwangjin, the other, the main one, to Tukusium. Apparently, near Wangsimni, you can still spot some older road layouts, maybe even street names that give a little nod to the train being there. And there's one really evocative marker mentioned near Dongyo Market, which is always buzzing. It's an old wooden utility pole, standing near the Red Cross building in an area that's now got trendy remodeled hanok cafes. This pole, looking really vintage compared to everything else, it's almost like a quiet wooden guidepost marking this forgotten journey. It's these little details the sources dig up that turn a simple walk into, well, an exploration.
These details are fantastic. The knife-like alleys, that wooden pole, they make the hidden history feel really tangible. So we're following this buried line, seeing the city's layers. But this train wasn't just about moving people around, was it? It had a real impact, economically, socially, connecting things you wouldn't expect. Like Seoul Forest today. You see that big horse statue at the entrance, and you think, horses. Why horses in this park?
Right, and our sources directly connect those dots. It's another layer of history uncovered. Seoul Forest, as we know it, wasn't always a park. Until the 1950s, maybe early 60s, that whole huge area was actually the Gyeongsong racecourse. So that horse statue, it's a very deliberate reference to what the land was right before it became a park.
And the Gyeongseong-Gate train line ran right near there, didn't it? The source even has this kind of charming, playful idea.
Yeah.
We met that tram from San Francisco, used to city streets, was just amazed watching those racehorses speeding past its tracks. It's a fun image, bringing together American transit, Korean horse racing, all linked by this forgotten train.
It is a fun image, but the connection to another industry is much more fundamental. Really crucial for understanding modern Seoul, especially Seongsu-dong. This train line is basically foundational to Seongsu-dong becoming the place it is today, famous for handmade shoes and leather goods. The sources explain how hides from the Majangdong slaughterhouse, which was a huge operation back then, were transported on this specific train line directly over to Seongsu-dong.
So it wasn't just random cargo. This route was like a dedicated supply chain link.
Exactly. The sources really stress this point. It wasn't just, one factor among many. This direct, efficient way of getting the raw material, the hides from the slaughterhouse area via the Gyeongseong-Gate train was absolutely fundamental. It laid the literal groundwork, the essential logistical connection that let Seongsu-dong grow into this hub for leather processing and shoemaking. It's a classic case of how infrastructure, even something small and now forgotten, can totally shape a neighborhood's identity for decades, and you can still see traces of it today. The sources point out there are still significant leather wholesale and retail alleys right behind places like the Cheong-Gyecheon, Sungsin-sanga, a living legacy.
That's incredible. Thinking that the roots of Seongsu's trendy shoe scene today trace back partly to hides geared on a little train that started in San Francisco. Wow. But the line wasn't only about industry and horse races. Our sources also show it connected to significant residential areas, communities often overlooked in Seoul's big modern story.
Yes, absolutely. The sources shine a light on the fact that there were shantytowns located right along parts of this Gyeongseong-Gate route, specifically along Shangashan Stream and stretching out towards Gyeongseong. They mention areas like near the Gunja Vehicle Base, Sagwon-dong, Songjang-dong, and one detail that might surprise people from the sources is that these weren't just like a brief post-war thing that vanished quickly. They actually lasted along these waterways until, well, surprisingly late, up to 1976 specifically.
1976. Wow, that's much more recent than I would have guessed. How did the sources kind of paint a picture of life in those communities near the train line?
They use some really specific details to bring it to life. They mention powerful photographs taken by a Japanese pastor, Nomura Motoyuki, who documented life there. The term hakodong-du, which means these sort of makeshift box-like homes, is mentioned as appearing in novels by the famous Korean writer Park Won-seo, so you get a literary glimpse too. There's also mention of the Nomura report map, which apparently showed the actual layout of these shantytown areas. So it wasn't abstract. These were real places, real communities. And the train line's path, often running just behind or beside these areas, meant it was part of the daily backdrop, the rhythm of life for the people living there.
So the train was woven into this really complex social fabric as well. And the story of those communities, it didn't just stop in 76, did it?
No, the sources follow that thread too. They note that after those last shanty towns were cleared, many residents were relocated, moved quite far down to Hwasong, specifically via the Namyang Breakwater, and this was guided by a pastor, Kim Jin-hong. And the sources offer this really fascinating historical breadcrumb to trace the connection. They mention that the name of Pastor Kim's church from back in the Cheong and Gyecheon days, Hwalbin Church, can actually still be found down in Hwasong today. It acts as this tangible link between these two seemingly separate histories, the shantytowns along the Forgotten Soul train line and the relocation communities much further south.
That detail about the church name, that's a powerful way to connect past and present. Okay, so we've traced the line, explored its industrial side, its social connections. Where did the journey usually end for people riding the Gyeongseong-Gate?
The main destination, the end of the line for a lot of people, according to the sources, was Tatuxium Amusement Park. Back then it is. And back then, this wasn't just an amusement park. It was huge for Seoul residents. The sources say it was basically the only major recreational place of its kind that most people in Seoul could actually get to using public transport. And that public transport was this Gyeongseong-Gate train.
The only one. Wow. That really highlights how important this little line must have been for just leisure, quality of life.
Absolutely. The sources talk about its scale and how popular it was. It was massive, like 200,000 pyong, and drew an incredible number of visitors every year, up to 3 million people. It was the place for Seoulites to go relax and have fun. People went swimming there in summer, ice skating, sledding in winter. It was the city's accessible playground. And its accessibility was completely tied to this little iron horse bringing everyone there.
It really gives you a feel for the train's role in everyday life, connecting work, home, and fun. And looking at Seoul today, you can still see the legacy of this line, or even though the train itself is long gone.
Totally. That end point, Tatuxium Amusement Park, it's now Tsutsium Hanging Park, right there on the Han River, still doing basically the same job. A huge green space, a place for recreation, easily reached by millions. And the whole area the train served, especially how it linked raw materials to workshops, that directly fed into the development of what's now the super vibrant, super trendy hot place, Seongsu-dong.
So the function carries on, and the places this forgotten line connected are now major modern spots. Subway Line 2, carrying millions along a similar route now, sort of fulfills the mass transit role this little train pioneered for a growing city, yeah.
It's a perfect example of how Seoul's strata, those layers of time we talked about at the start, are always shifting. Old things don't just disappear. They get built on, or their purpose, the connections they made, they get reborn in new ways, leaving behind these hidden traces that still influence what the city becomes. This Gyeongseong-Gate train line, with its improbable journey from San Francisco to Tatuxium, it's a really key but often missed part of the story of how a place like Seongsu went from being this industrial area served by a unique little train to the dynamic hotspot everyone knows today.
So using our sources like urban archaeologists, we followed this really unexpected path of the Gyeongseong-Gate train. We went from its, frankly, shocking San Francisco origins to its vital role connecting communities, enabling industries we know today, like Seongsu shoes, serving these massively popular spots like Gyeongseong, and uncovering these hidden layers of Seoul's history, buried in its streets, marked maybe just by a weird alley shape on a map or an old wooden pole.
Yeah, understanding this seemingly small, forgotten line really does help you see how the past, sometimes from really surprising places, is just woven into the city you walk around in today. It really shows how specific historical things, even something as odd as an imported train system, can genuinely shape the identity and the path of development for places like Seongsu.
Okay, so here's something to think about. Maybe take with you as you wander around places you know. If one forgotten train line that somehow ran from San Francisco to Gyeongseong holds this many surprising stories, these hidden connections, these deep impacts on the city, what other hidden histories are out there? Buried just under the pavement or tucked inside buildings you pass every day? What stories are waiting for you to uncover in the places you think you know? Keep exploring, yeah. The treasures are definitely out there.